Hello, everyone. I didn't introduce myself last time. I'll do that this time. So I will be your MC for the next hour and a half or so. My name is CJ Hunsinger. I'm head of platform at Galaxy for the ventures team. And so up next, we have Natasha from Boys Club and Ben from Blackbird, and they'll be talking about the future of on-chain loyalty. Enjoy.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm Natasha from Boys Club. Thanks for being here. Excited to chat. Okay, so today we are here with Ben Leventhal. He is a tech meets hospitality legend, co-founder of Eater and Resi, now building the next great hospitality platform, Blackbird. Arguably, Blackbird is one of the only consumer platforms applications that has product market fit in crypto, if you ask me. Some crazy stats. Almost 250 million total fly distributed across over 100,000 wallets. They announced some big stuff today, Flynet, as well as its native token. Hi. Hi, Ben.
Hi. Hi.
How's it going?
Great.
Thanks for being here. Excited to have you at ETHDenver. Okay, so there's a lot we can talk about. We're going to get into the tech. We're going to get into Blackbird's announcement. But before we do that, I love restaurants. I worked in restaurants for many years. I was a hostess. I was a waitress. I think a lot about the food I consume and the people that make that food and create those experiences. And so I'm curious, what brought you to restaurants, hospitality? Like, what was that initial motivation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really lucky to have found a career in something that I love and was obsessed with. I mean, I think everyone in some ways loves restaurants and is obsessed with restaurants. We go out to dinner on Tuesday nights and on Saturday nights and to celebrate, and there's probably some memory in your life that's associated with a specific restaurant, and it was your happy place on that night. So, we all sort of have this connection with restaurants, and somehow I was lucky enough to turn that into a career. But I think what's always been intriguing to me about restaurants is how underpowered they are economically relative to how much people love them.
Yeah.
It's this huge industry. It's $1 trillion in the U.S. The brands of good restaurants in all of the cities of the U.S. and the world are recognized, known brands. But when you look at the individual businesses of these restaurants, they're often subscale. They fail at an extremely high rate. And if that's not bad enough, if you look at it over time, it's getting worse and worse. 10, 20 years ago, restaurants could eke out a profit by and large. Today, the average restaurant's profit margin is under 5%. Oh. And if you're operating less than 5%, you're a couple of bad Saturdays away from losing money.
Yeah. Okay, I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of like the problem, what's broken, how Blackbird is addressing that. I want to start with the loyalty piece because I know that's central to what at least the consumer experience of Blackbird is. And you all argue that it's essential for the future of restaurants. I think when I think about loyalty, I think of a very surface level thing that is maybe an inconvenience to the restaurant. But the way that you guys really think about it is that guest segmentation, engagement, retention, all of these things are foundational to a new type of operating as a restaurant. So could you talk a little bit about how you think about loyalty in the stack of sort of this more positive future that you're building for restaurants and hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, restaurants and their guests should be connected in scale ways, sort of unconditionally. I think there's a couple different ways you can think about why loyalty is important and why is it broken, and we go through them a little bit maybe. But the one that to me resonates the most is that restaurants in today's technology stack, every time somebody walks into a restaurant, more or less, the restaurant has to acquire the customer again. It's really hard for restaurants to stay connected to their best customers. Maybe you're a regular at your neighborhood joint and you know the maitre d', or you know a server that takes really good care of you. So your relationship with that restaurant is only good as long as that person's working there.
Yeah.
And the second that person leaves, then you have to start again, and so does the restaurant. And so that's just a very expensive process, right? And so when you think about how services like the reservations companies, for sure, and some of the POS companies operate, and lots of other kinds of third parties that sit between consumers and the restaurant, what's happening is they're selling the customer back to the restaurant over and over and over again.
Okay.
And so if you go back to that point about how thin the margins are, that starts to feel pretty untenable.
Yeah.
And so we just sort of fundamentally believe that every customer in every restaurant should on their own be able to connect and stay connected. So, when you walk into a restaurant that's on the Blackbird network, you use the NFC chip, you tap in, that's a digital handshake that you, the customer, make with the restaurant. Now you're connected. It's as simple as that. And we kind of feel like it needs to be as simple as that for it to be scalable and sustainable. The other reason that this is important is because the big hospitality companies, the ones that actually are at scale, the Papa John's of the world and the Sweetgreens and companies like that, they are investing heavily in loyalty.
Okay.
And so as an independent restaurant, whether you like it or not, you're competing with Papa John's and Dunkin' for your customer.
Yeah.
If you're a coffee shop in the West Village, you may not think you're competing with Dunkin', you are competing with Dunkin'. And so in many ways, what we're trying to build with Blackbird is a platform that levels the playing field, that gives the average independent joint the same tools and the same leverage in terms of long-term customer retention that a Dunkin' has.
Great. And I think one of the things that I'm really curious your take on and how you think about it is, so this current model is broken, the margins are really tiny, loyalty is essential, but independent restaurants can't really access that and don't have the tools to access that in the same way that these huge conglomerates can. And so blockchain fixes this, is your argument. And so I want to hear.
Of course it is. We're here at it.
We're here. So how do you see the infrastructure that you guys are building? Like, how does it solve for that? How does it give these restaurants a shot at that data collection? I know there's a ton of stuff that you guys have built around payments, and we can maybe get into the details, but I think like high level, what is it about Blackbird that is distinctly different because of the way that you guys have built it that gives that restaurant a shot?
Well, look, we are excited enough about our business and confident enough in our vision to say that a lot of what we're talking about is in the future. It's the promise of what's to come. This is early days, and we all know that. Even if sometimes that we get excited about the moment, it's early days. But the two things that we think are really interesting for us in terms of using blockchain here is, number one, we're building an entirely new transactions network. Mm-hmm. When a consumer goes into a restaurant and pays, as of today, that's happening on-chain, on our own network. And one of those hasn't been stood up in a very, very long time. And the cost of that chain, and because it's a blockchain-based system, are a tiny fraction of what they would be if we were using the legacy rails.
Okay.
So we can offer up to restaurants 2% flat as a processing fee. We can have a really profitable business, and the restaurant is saving almost half of what their current cost is. So that's a huge win and very exciting. And I don't think we could do that in an off-chain environment. I think if we were to try to build that otherwise, it would be way too hard. There would be way too many security issues, ledger issues, all kinds of stuff, scalability issues. The other thing comes back to loyalty, and it comes back to identity. So we strongly, strongly believe that when a consumer is walking around and visiting restaurants, the consumer owns their identity. The consumer needs to be able to walk into the restaurant and say, here's who I am. If you really think about it, consumers can't do that today, because if you want to walk into a restaurant and say, well, here's the 10 other places I really love, you could write it down on a sheet of paper and hand it to them, but otherwise there's no technology to facilitate that.
Okay.
So that's a really good, I think, example of why on-chain matters here. So every Blackbird user has a wallet that we spin up in the background, and that wallet, although anonymized, contains a customer's dining history.
Okay.
So when you tap into with a restaurant, we connect that wallet to the restaurant. So the restaurant can say, okay, now I understand who's standing in front of me.
Yeah.
So those two things, more than anything else, and all of the ways those two things evolve and mature, come together, allow for third-party developers, I think those are fundamentally kind of on-chain tools that we're using, infrastructure that we're using, and is going to today, but also even more so over time, have Blackbird look totally different than other stuff that's out there.
That's so honestly inspiring. And I think the thing that clicks for me around it is that loyalty for me is really about personalization, and to have a personal relationship with a restaurant that maybe I'm going to for the first time is really powerful. And it takes it away from like, oh, this is a free drink, but it's more like I'm sort of known by this restaurant and they're able to access a way that I enjoy to dine and I like an experience that because of what you're building hasn't previously been really possible. So you guys made some big announcements today. You launched Flynet. I want to dig into it. Give us like a high level, what's the big announcement? What happened today?
So the big announcement is that we've launched Flynet, which is our own transaction network that's on-chain. It's an L3 on top of Base, and it's live as of today. Alongside that, we've continued to clarify and, I guess, finalize our plans for its token F2. And sometime next week, there will be a season 1 airdrop of F2. This is another reason why Blackbird needs to be on chain. It's somewhat less practical than the two I discussed, but the other big thing here is that when we look at the systems that exist for restaurants, and by and large that exist in lots of other industries, ownership is inappropriate relative to the players in the industry.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that we've said from the start is restaurants, being $1 trillion industry, must own the network that they're using to process transactions. When you walk into a restaurant, you sit down, you eat the food you want to pay, there shouldn't be a third party there.
Yeah.
You're sitting in the restaurant.
Yeah.
You don't need any layer of, you don't need the 3.5% that credit cards take for all the things that they do. So we want to build this network for restaurants. We want it to be co-owned by restaurants. And so the other big piece of this is that the restaurants will be co-owners with us of this network. F2, the gas and ultimately governance token that exists for this network, we will have some, of course, but what we have set up is 7 seasons by which we airdrop it to network participants,
okay,
restaurants, consumers, and restaurant workers. So
wow,
today is day 0, but the mainnet is live. Everything that's happening on Blackbird is now on chain. Next week is the first airdrop, and it only gets more interesting from there.
Great. Up only. Okay, so the way that I've understood Flynet is sort of like it's now financial rails for the industry. Like the future of it is that everything could be built on top of these financial rails. And one of the things that really clicked for me around it was around payments. And you're a Blackbird user, you go to a restaurant, you pay seamlessly through the app, and that being really similar to me of the moment from when I was using yellow cabs to when I was using Uber. And it's such a small, when you say it out loud, you're like, oh, this is really small. But the experience of it is completely different.
It's totally different.
And like when I'm sitting in a taxi and I have to pay, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking about how much this costs and like the ride. And I see that for you guys with Blackbird, where that transition is going to totally shift the way that people think about how they're paying at a restaurant.
I mean, I absolutely believe it will. When I use Blackbird now, sometimes I'm still in my neighborhood, there's a couple of holdouts that are still restaurants that I love, so I go, and despite the fact that they're not on Blackbird.
You haven't won them over yet?
Well, they all, on a long enough timeline, they're all going to be Blackbird
Yeah.
customers, so we don't worry about that. But yeah, the experience is magical.
Yeah.
You get up and leave when you're done.
It's so great. I love it. So I want to talk about some of your visions for what can be built on top of Flynet. So we're here at ETHDenver. We're in a room full of builders. I think that one of the things that you've talked about that's really compelling is, again, this way that the industry itself can actually share in the upside, that there's all of these different huge businesses that there's absolutely no access for the businesses that keep those larger businesses alive to engage in. And so what are some of the things that you sort of think people could think about building, why they would build on top of Flynet? Yeah, give some inspiration to the room.
Well, I'm excited to see what people come up with, but if you want to connect to all of the restaurants of the world, all the restaurant consumers of the world, and connect to those entities and have granular information about who they are, what their behaviors are, we think Flynet is super compelling. I would say there's a couple of pet projects that I'm excited to see come to fruition, and I'm sort of willing the team on nights and weekends to do some of these things if nobody else puts up their hand. But one big thing is, this is certainly of the moment, but we think there's some kind of food meme coin game to be played.
I'd be a holder.
every week, 5 different food meme coins. You compete get to vote with Fly. The winner gets burgers for a year or something.
Nice.
Dating app is an obvious one, like matching on preferences. I really think, and this is not pure crypto. This is crypto plus AI, but connecting to the world's restaurants, the way reservations work, the way connectivity works is going to evolve. So you could build some kind of AI booking agent on top of Fly easily. But we have 500 restaurants today. It'll be more than 2,000 by the end of the year. The number of consumers is growing massively. We have 240 million Fly in circulation.
Wow.
There's real raw material there to play with. So we're excited to see what happens.
Yeah, there's so much distribution that people could utilize. Okay, so some of the things that you talk about in this most recent announcement is seamless payments, which we talked about, new data, no middleman, whole new economy. Can you talk a little bit more about the last 3? I think we talked about personalization, but I think there's more there around data and what it means for restaurants. And then the no middleman and new economy, I'd love to hear a little bit more about.
Well, the new economy is the end result, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the new economy is what happens when there are fewer middlemen and restaurants are more in control of the network that they're using. I mean, the simplest math to understand this is restaurants are right now paying 375 basis points plus or minus for transactions.
Yeah.
On Blackbird, they're paying 200. So there's almost 200 basis points there to reinvest. There's 200 basis points that restaurants can now use off of top-line revenue to give back to customers, to build new infrastructure, to tip out waiters and hostesses, whatever it is. That's a big change.
Yeah.
2% of top line is a lot for a restaurant when all they're making in the end is 4%.
Right.
So I think that there's just a lot that's going to happen. There's a lot that's going to change. That 2%, it may not feel like much, but it's 2% that the restaurant doesn't have control of today.
Yeah.
So we really like how it feels to say to the restaurants, do what you want with this.
Yeah.
It's yours. So I think that's one big example. But again, as restaurants come to earn more and more of the network ownership and control, they're going to be able to set their own boundaries about how the network behaves. Right now what we've said is the network's going to take a 25 Fly clip on every transaction, and that Fly is going to accrue and then be redistributed to the holders of F2. So restaurants may decide that that's not actually the way they want to do it. They may decide that there'll be a more expensive clip on Saturday nights because the business is better.
Yeah.
And it'll be cheaper to process on Mondays, Tuesdays, right? So I just think there's a lot that the restaurants can do once they get control of the system.
Yeah. Okay, we're running low on time here. Last question. Favorite restaurant in New York?
You can't really ask that.
Come on, you have to say one.
I love
Where
all.
You would go Saturday night? Where would you go Saturday night?
Oh, well, here's what I'll tell you.
Okay.
We've been playing around a ton with Claude and with
Okay.
AI at Blackbird because we have a bunch of stuff that later this year we're going to start doing. But one of the quick things I did was I took my last 3 years of dining history and I plugged it into Claude.
Oh, cool.
And I just asked it for some dashboarding and what's going on. So I will tell you this.
Okay.
35% of all of my dining in the last 3 years has been at Raff's, Via Carota, and Esodi.
Wow.
So whether or not...
Okay.
So we'll let the data speak.
Okay.
I clearly like those restaurants.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Thanks for being here.
You.